Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek podcast. Join Ken and crew each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock for Strange New Worlds Season 3, Episodes 7 through 8. I'm your Chief Engineer, Ken Gagne, and I'm joined by my co-host, M. McGinnis. Hello, M.
Hey, Ken, how are you feeling for our penultimate recording?
Penultimate, I know. It's come and gone so quickly. I'm glad we have one more episode of this podcast left 2 weeks from now.
Yeah,
And then the show will go on hiatus until a new Star Trek series starts, but we don't need to rush it. We still have a little bit more of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the third and anti-penultimate season left to go.
fair.
Yeah. I don't know if there's been any Star Trek news. We usually talk about Star Trek news on this show. There is a new Star Trek Voyager video game coming out.
Does that look like something that you'd play? I'm not much of a gamer these days, but is it something that you would play?
I'm not sure. I don't play computer games mostly, and that's what most Star Trek games are these days, like Star Trek
No.
Timelines and etc. I know that there's a Star Trek Prodigy game for the Switch, which I bought on sale, and I haven't played it yet. I hear it's just a basic, push boxes around to solve puzzles kind of 3D game.
Sure.
Um, and also a lot of Star Trek games, just due to the nature of them being video games, focus a lot on combat, which is not, for me, the core of what Star Trek is. And yet the alternative is to have a video game where you go around and talk to aliens, which might not translate well to be a video game.
Yeah, it seems like I think if they did it right, it could be very interesting. As I recall, it was there's a very popular Star Wars game about 20 years ago, Knights of the Old Republic, that had a lot of it did have its combat moments, but it had a lot of exploration and um, other opportunities to interact with characters in the game that weren't just like how quickly I can kill this person kind of a deal. So I don't know. I think maybe it could be done right, but I haven't seen a Trek game yet that's really been focused on that.
Well, I attended a panel at this last PAX East in Boston this past May where the person who was hosting it went over like decades worth of Star Trek video games. And there have been so many that I haven't played, and so many of them were very well received. I'm not saying Star Trek can't be a good video game. It's just that
Sure.
since I'm a console gamer, I think the last Star Trek game I played was either Star Trek on the 8-bit Nintendo, which was like a
Mhm.
top-down adventure game. And then there was Starfleet Academy on the Super Nintendo, which, fun fact, the graphics for that were done by Scott Everts, who used to work at Interplay, and he did some Apple II GS games like Out of This World.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, small world. I say that,
Yeah.
not that our listeners care about the Apple II, but you and I are
Mhm.
Apple II fans. So,
Yeah, I remember for a long time Star Trek was kind of like Star Wars about where in the video games they had a long history of sucking a lot. And it seems like finally there are actually some interesting games that are engaging and not repetitive. I will say though that I think my last interaction with a Star Trek game was the Promethean Prophecy for the Apple II. Yeah, it's been a very long time since I played a Trek game.
that does go back a bit. My goodness.
Yeah,
All right, well, shall we talk about episodes 7 and 8?
yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, so episode 7 is What is Starfleet is the name of the episode. And this reminded me of a book written by Rob Perlman, who we had on this show as a guest many years ago. He wrote a book called Starfleet is dot dot dot. And I mistakenly misremembered the name of that book, and I thought, like, oh, is this an adaptation of the book? Is he getting royalties for inspiring this episode? But
Mhm.
there are similar titles, but not quite the same. This one is the product of what we've been seeing of Erica Ortegas's brother Beto wandering around the ship, shooting documentary footage, and now he's assembled it all together into a 1 hour documentary called What is Starfleet? I was not expecting that we were going to actually see a documentary. I don't look at spoilers online. I didn't know that what Beto was shooting was something we were going to see. Did you see this style of episode coming?
I thought maybe that they would do something like this. It's a very cinema verite feel. I think that's the word. That reality or the documentary. By shooting a documentary, you discover the reality behind what you think you're seeing, kind of a deal. I thought maybe they would do kind of a 50-50 thing where you would get like scenes of the documentary intertwined with like a regular operation of the starship or whatever. I didn't think the entire episode would be this way.
Well, kind of like the TOS episode, the Menagerie or the Cage, where we're
Mhm.
watching a previous episode framed as a flashback.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see how that would have worked too. I don't think this episode had the traditional opening because it technically wasn't an episode of Star Trek. It was a documentary about Star Trek.
Yeah, it started out with it had like a section of disclaimer text or
The disclaimers and the credits.
right, yeah, and so I think that they did that very well. He kind of jumped right into like let's get into the moral center of what the Federation and Starfleet really are. Um, we and there were some interesting, I think, and important maybe topics that they hit on here with, the exploration of Vulcan racism that Spock faced as a half human growing up and how that affected him. And a lot of talk about like when is killing okay, who gets to decide that.
Hmm. Yeah, and they were
Uh,
really and Beta was really using the information he had gathered by asking very pointed questions. Like he wasn't just asking anybody, "What would you do if a Gorn ship showed up?" He was asking La'an that.
yeah, I thought the focus was really well done, where they allowed the each character's voice to express certain aspects of what Beta was trying to capture by focusing on their specific, um, specialties. And we got a lot of like Ortega's, his sister, her kind of the feeling that we've had from her recently of the overall just sort of ambivalence about what they were doing and how things were being handled. And, Lon talking about the personal injuries that she sustained and then kind of the militant nature of Starfleet's interactions with other civilizations.
Yeah, and Beto chose to largely frame this documentary around one specific mission, which was that the Enterprise was charged with transporting a biological creature from one planet to another, where the inhabitants of that other planet would use it as a weapon because they were being attacked by a greater military force and were just being devastated. So I have a couple of objections, or at least questions, to that premise because A, Starfleet doesn't exploit other living beings in that way, or at least they're not supposed to. And we even saw that in Discovery, which was originally set in this era, where they had the tardigrade that they were using to pilot their spore drive. And, they weren't really allowed to do that, so they stopped doing it. And also, the Prime Directive prevents people from getting involved, not just in pre-warp civilizations, but in the internal affairs of non-Federation planets. So here we are transporting a biological weapon to an alien race involved in a war that doesn't involve Starfleet. How or why do you think that can be justified?
Yeah, I had a lot of questions about that too. And one of the things that I've has come up for me, and that I tend to have, when I talk to my Trekkie friends, um, and we, late night philosophy over beers or whatever. Something that always comes up for me has been this sort of, the role play the scenario of what happens if Starfleet approaches a planet within their, the Federation's borders that doesn't want to do business with them, that does not want to be a member of Starfleet, and would rather join the Klingon Empire. And how would Starfleet handle that in a realistic way? And this is not really that; it's much more focused on like the importance of uh, a sentient being and communications and things like that. There was a lot of the talking head interviews, although I do think they did a great job here of like keeping those clips really short. It wasn't like 5 minutes of somebody rambling about, It was a few sentences here and there, but there was a lot, especially, like Una was talking about blind faith in their mission and the dangers of questioning orders, which was an interesting way to revisit that earlier conflict she had with Ortegas about like following orders and making decisions that were not yours to be made, kind of a deal. Of course, ultimately, they chose not to escort that being into the war zone, and instead, sent it off into the sun to die, I guess. I found that an odd juxtaposition of like they spent the whole um, of the episode talking about, and Pike did this too, about like, so, we have orders and we don't always like them, but we follow them. And then explicitly violating those orders by not transporting the creature to the war zone.
We don't know what their orders exactly were. There were times when they got on comms with Starfleet Admiralty, and that half of the conversation was redacted. It was not shared as part of the documentary. So we don't know what was being said. We don't know what internal affairs or other matters or factors were being considered. I don't remember though, at the very end, Pike chose to make that planet that the space dragon came from into a like a natural habitat, or that would be preserved by Starfleet. They would protect it. Was that a decision that was made before or after the space dragon flew into the sun?
I don't know that they showed specifically that moment when that was decided. Uh, it seemed to be kind of, and the Lutani, I guess they were the ones who were trying to get this creature escorted. Um, Seeing the reaction about like, like who are you to decide what we do with our uh, war resources, so to speak? This isn't even your war. Stay out of it. Um, then it became a question of sort of does might make right, and I think even Beto brought up when he was talking to Uhura about like who gets to decide who kills, um, and when, and why do you get to decide that? And her answer was basically, well, we have more resources than anyone else, and so it's our responsibility to make difficult decisions,
Hmm.
which struck me as uh, a little sanctimonious. But I do understand that there are people, who have a diversity of humans and other races. In Starfleet, everyone is going to have different opinions on how things should be run and what they do or don't do.
Hmm.
Um, I do think there was a lot of kind of hiding behind. I don't know if this was just uh, a shortcut that the writers felt that they needed to take to move the story along, but there was a lot of hiding behind classified, and using that as the, um, kind of a moral blindness, I guess. Well, you don't need to know, so just do it. Um, and Which I think is actually kind of a realistic, like, that's the way militaries actually function. We're not giving you enough information to make a decision on your own. We need you to do this because we said do it. Um, I don't know. Taking a weapon forward to another planet, though, seems sort of beyond the pale, I guess.
Well, there's certainly a lot of precedent for it in our own history.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we can go back to Cold Wars and proxy wars like in Vietnam, but also nowadays, some people were wondering if this episode was a metaphor for Palestine and Israel, for how at the very beginning of this episode, we saw that one planet had lost like 100,000 people or maybe even 10,000 people, whereas the other lost millions. So there's clearly a discrepancy there.
Yeah, I
And
think sorry, go ahead.
and unlike Gaza, like the United States is siding with Israel, which is the larger military force, but not too far away, we're siding with Ukraine, which is the smaller military force. And so some people are wondering, is this a metaphor for Ukraine? Is this a metaphor for how we should be handling Gaza? There are a lot of different ways to interpret this, and that's often what Star Trek is social commentary about the real world.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think Beto, I don't know who he was talking to. It was either Ortega's, his sister, or Uhura about like, and he used the words directly. The act, how do you justify the actions of a colonizer who takes, which is what he was feeling that Starfleet was doing in this case. And I without getting too into the politics of it, you know, there's always um, there's never just a unilateral we support or we do this is our policy in the case of two smaller countries at war, and it applies across the board. That's never been the case, and doesn't make sense that you would have a policy like that. There's always going to be, what are our interests here? Because, I mean, there for all the history of Gaza and Israel, how horrible all of that is. The United States has largely taken a stance of non-participation with things that they can't find an interest in the Congo or in the Sudan, places like this where it's genocide's happening, and we're just standing by and letting it happen.
Yeah, that's unfortunately very sadly true that we're not standing up for what's right. We're not standing up for humanity and civil rights. We're standing up for ourselves ultimately. And so I wonder what was Starfleet's stake in this? What was that planet offering them? How did they get persuaded to involve themselves in this war?
I think at the beginning they talked about. I think in the beginning they talked about how the Lutani were not members of the Federation, and in fact were kind of suspected of the Lutani had been preying on Starfleet's cargo transports and things like that, and were sort of aligned with the Klingons. And so you kind of wonder, like, okay, was this part of Starfleet's justification for getting involved in all of this?
Well, that's what made it all much weirder for me, though, because the Lutani were the aliens that that Starfleet was supporting in this war. So if the
Right.
Lutani is helping the Klingons, which are Starfleet's enemy, why are we helping our enemy's friend?
Well, I don't know that. My impression was that they had sort of sided with the Klingons, but were not member of the Klingon Empire either. And maybe here's a chance to like curry some goodwill and influence them, maybe to talk them into joining us.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, to peel off support for the Klingon Empire by killing them with kindness, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows, maybe even getting them, they had expressed non-interest in joining the Federation, but who knows, maybe we could shift that a little bit too. There's never, especially when it comes to war and citing, there's never like I'm just going to pick that person just because. There's always a reason.
Right. Yeah.
And what I got from it was just that, like, this is an opportunity to undermine our enemy and maybe get set up, a clear path in the future for possible, normalization of relations with this planet.
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought of that. That's really cool. I do want to talk about the space dragon itself because we had that whole plot where Spock went out in a shuttlecraft to try to talk to it, and he ended up being too psychically sensitive, which I thought was interesting. That the thing that you would normally make him the prime candidate actually made him the worst candidate. And Uhura, who we saw I think in the second season, how there was that episode that where like she was seeing zombies everywhere and all she had to do was listen to them, like in The Sixth Sense. Her empathy is one of her greatest strengths. And in this episode, she listened to the space dragon, and the space dragon's plea that it wanted to be euthanized and that its dying concern was for its children. There, maybe this is just me. There have not been many Star Trek episodes that have actually made me cry. This was one of them. I thought that whole arc, that resolution, I just thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, I thought that was really great. I mean, the whole like mutant like kill me kind of a thing is a bit of a trope, and I think that they handled it pretty well in this case because it could have been. I think the whole thing, a lot of this is just revisiting older tropes from other shows and from Trek itself, because a lot, original series Trek or original series movies era Trek would have been a lot of this would have been solved by sitting around a very long wooden table and talking politics.
Yeah.
Um, I and I did think that that was kind of a great hook to express a lot of the ideas and the sentiments that had been discussed up to this point of like, well, how do we handle these things and the individual feelings of I don't know, and well, now here's an example, and it fit in nicely with the documentary.
Yeah.
So I thought everything about that was really well done. I didn't have necessarily the same emotional attachment that you did to the specifics of the plight of that creature,
Yeah.
but I could absolutely see um, where that would come from. Yeah.
Your point about other movies where a creature is in pain and is asking to be killed, it is that, but it also reminded me, I'm just thinking of this now, of the Iron Giant,
Oh
where
yeah.
he says, I am not a weapon. And the way he proves that is by halting the destruction of the people he cares about. And that was sort of this creature's feeling as well, where she was saying, I don't want to hurt people. I've been made to hurt people and I don't want to. I would rather die than violate my core principles, which is pacifism.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point. Not only is this thing a sentient feeling creature, but it has the enough abstract thinking to understand the consequences of actions it is being forced to take. And I thought that was really neat.
And once Starfleet recognized that this alien creature had that capacity, I think that's when they changed the rules and said, we're not going to do this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Once they understood what they were really dealing with, and I there is it is kind of the moment of that Star Trek optimism coming through again, where okay, uh, how many more Latani lives will be lost because Star Trek took this away from them. Um, it's kind of the save one life, and or cost you lose 1,000 lives to save one kind of the deal, and deciding what's important to whom. Um, I do think that it was interesting that like there was a moment at the end when the Lutani commander of the warship came on and it's like, what are you doing? This is none of your business. Stay out of it. Um, Strange New Worlds has done a great job, I think, of kind of like not letting stuff like that just go. It might end the episode, but my hope is that further down the road, this will be revisited somehow.
It'll be cool to see these alien creatures again.
Right.
And,
Or the payoff for like, this was the decision that you made, Pike, and now here's what's going to happen.
oh, I see. Yeah, yeah, the war. Yeah. You are right about, I mean, there's that Vulcan philosophy that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, but I've never seen that philosophy exploited because it's basically the trolley problem. Like, oh, it's okay to
Yeah.
kill 10 people if you save 100, whereas Vulcans are pacifists and they wouldn't actually kill anybody, I think, even if it meant more people would die. But you're right. Starfleet basically chose to save one alien over an entire sentient race that's at war. So,
Yeah. And I did really think that it was great that they didn't, there were no answers given, like it really, it's just a matter of sometimes hard choices have to be made. And this is the choice that was made. Um,
yeah.
and I kind of liked that it was a lot of, especially with Next Gen, I think, there and a little bit maybe with Voyager, a lot of those episodes were about moralizing and about always providing justification and why what we did was the right thing to do, rather than in this case it was more just this is the information that we were given, and so this is the choice that we made, and not trying to justify it beyond that. I
Mhm.
really like that.
Yeah, Strange New Worlds has done a great job of balancing those serious topics with, as we'll see in our next episode, silly stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, this
Uh,
is another 50-50 kind of a deal with the double episode thing, something
yeah,
very heavy and a lot of thought provoking and emotional responses to something very silly that I really enjoyed.
yeah. I do want to say a few more things about the documentary. One is that
Mm.
Beto, he has that last scene with Ahura, and she says, like, the reason you're looking to blame Starfleet is because you're angry about what it did to your sister. I don't really feel like there was a lot of buildup there. We didn't see Beto resenting Starfleet in previous episodes, and so that sort of came
No.
out of left field for me.
Yeah, that's felt not completely disingenuous, but just sort of, yeah. I think if you're going to put an argument out there like that, you need to have provided some sort of evidence coming into it, and we really haven't seen that.
Yeah, they did a good job building up to Gamble's death, unlike they did with Ariam's death in Discovery, as we discussed last time. But
Hmm.
this is another instance where they forgot to do the buildup.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, that would have been nice to have seen that further explored. And I did like that they used this. Use the documentary style also to kind of explore more of Mbenga's ambivalence about his past and then participation in the Klingon War. And, he's a healer and a doctor now, but they're listing like, confirmed kills in all of these wars and classified, redacted, 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 you know, um, giving the impression that this man was a stone cold killer. Um, and seeing him just kind of struggle with being asked the questions and not being able to really come up with good answers for it.
Hmm.
I That was what I responded to emotionally. I think you're talking about how you respond, how you really connected with the dragon, and that for me it was watching Mbenga kind of struggle with his own personal guilt and really not coming away with any answers or feeling any better about it.
Yeah, I mean, we have the context of what has happened in sickbay in previous episodes. If we didn't have that context, this still would have been a very interesting illusion or tease about who is this man and what don't we know about him. I mean, that if this show was Firefly, that's what would have happened. Like we would have had this
Yeah,
doctor that we don't know anything about, and it's revealed throughout the seasons. And that is kind of what Star Trek did, but I think Firefly would have done it backwards.
yeah. Well, I think one of the questions that was asked was something about like, how many people have you killed in sick bay or something like that?
But
And
have you ever scrubbed the footage of what happened in
that's
sickbay?
right.
And he just
Yeah, and
said,
him,
I do not recall.
yeah, just refusing to answer that, plead the fifth.
Hmm.
Um, and
However,
go ahead.
but there were a lot of scenes in the documentary where the footage was taken not from Beto's drones, but from security cameras on board the Enterprise. And there have been so many episodes of Star Trek in general, not just Strange New Worlds, where they're asking themselves, who did this? How did this happen? Like, did they not have security cameras? How convenient that they're there when you need them and not when other times.
Yeah, I think that tends to be sort of a plot decision usually
Yeah.
when that kind of thing happens, and it doesn't really. I mean, I think one of the earlier episodes where he first showed up about to make the documentary, they were talking about all of the footage and things that he was allowed to have access to and how it bothered Pike.
Hmm.
But there are definitely, yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of problems would be solved, and there would be entire episodes or even arcs that would be unnecessary if somebody remembered, hey, security footage.
Yep.
So
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Maybe they've always had it. It's just that they forget they have it.
right, yeah, or
Yeah.
the old trick of like the the 2 hour videotape thing. We only have so much footage, and then it gets scrubbed.
Yep. Convenient. So, any other points about this episode, or shall I ask you just whether or not you liked it?
I think I covered everything. The only thing that really bothered me, I guess, was just they spent all this time talking about following orders, and then to me, it felt like at the end, then they decided we're going to go do what we want to do anyway. Um, but I think I really liked this episode. I mean, it was a heavy one, and sometimes it takes you don't come away with like, "Ha ha, I really enjoyed it," kind of a thing. But I think it was a really great episode. I think they did they consistently are putting out great content with the show, and this is another example of that I really liked.
Yeah, it's not just the content and the tone of the show that they've been very creative about all three seasons, but in this episode, we saw the presentation style. Like, this was a whole different way to edit an episode of Star Trek. And I thought they did really well. I will say though, one thing they built up to which didn't pay off was Pelia hamming it up for the camera. Like
Yeah,
she wasn't in this episode at all.
yeah, and I was kind of grateful for that, actually.
I thought you might be.
Yeah, she's just not. I don't like that character. I
That's
just
fine.
don't.
Or maybe the way the actor does her anyway.
Yeah, the more interviews that I read, the more it seems a lot like Carol is giving them what they were asking for.
Oh, okay.
Um, her accent thing has always been a weird choice, but eh.
Yeah. I noticed she's not even listed in the opening credits. She's in the post credits as like also starring or guest starring or co-starring.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to what is Starfleet. Note, we just did that episode. Let's move on to 4.5 Vulcans, which I just watched today because I had a busy weekend.
Mhm.
So in this episode, well, first of all, this episode did not play out the way I thought. So they had to go down to a planet and pretend to be Vulcans, but in a very convincing way that was not just prosthetics. So they actually used a serum or transmogrifier to turn into Vulcans, which immediately conferred upon them the emotions and logic of a Vulcan. And they went down to the planet and fixed the thing and came right back up. I did not see that coming.
Yeah, me either. Like they did spend a few minutes, several minutes building it up, and then just literally seconds later, it was solved and they were back on the ship.
Yep.
And the Kirkovian serum or whatever they called it, that was the actual, the bait and switch kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
that was the plot device.
Right. The MacGuffin. And I did enjoy watching. There's the few seconds of them kind of, they get the shot in the neck. There's like 3 seconds that pass. And then watching them freak out on the floor for a few seconds. Oh my God, the emotions. As
Hmm.
they, except for Pelia, who nothing happened to her. Nothing. Which is really, again, odd. And I don't know what she was doing in this episode because they didn't really go anywhere with that. Like why
Yeah.
would so it didn't affect her differently? We don't know. We don't care because
Well, I mean, it had the same effect on her that LSD did in the 1960s and the 1990s and last June.
yeah, exactly.
No. I did. It was pretty clearly telegraphed in this episode that this was going to be a silly episode. As soon as Pike
Yes,
stood up and his hair was straight up,
his hair was way different. Like what?
like, yeah, like it's kind of like when Peter Parker gets bitten by a radioactive spider and it gives him abs.
Right.
Like, yeah, the Vulcan serum gives you straight up hair. It gives you, this is literally what they call it on the set, Pike's Peak.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I love it.
Yep.
Um, yeah, that was and all right.
But I gotta say, right from that, we see, I'm sorry to cut you off, but Pike's change, which happens before the opening sequence, well, changed the opening sequence of the show.
Yeah. I was going to mention something that to me felt very much like um, I guess what I would call a Vulcan accent or something that he was doing. And in a weird and I guess funny way, it reminded me of the Galaxy Quest aliens, the Thermians, and how they kind of spoke that weirdly broken, exaggerated English um, in the way that Pike or the actor chose to run with that, and um, it was a little bit one dimensional, but I sort of get okay, it's this is humor, so it doesn't need to be I guess all that deep, but how each of them um, affected them, brought pieces of their personality out in different ways. I mean, it all started, of course, with the sort of arrogance and the super overconfidence in their abilities. Now that we're Vulcans, right? Um, and I really loved them bringing back Kirk for this episode,
Hmm.
and watching his interactions with Scotty and with Lon.
What did you like about that?
Well, I mean, Kirk, Kirk and Spock were always kind of the what is it, the id and the super ego. I think one is just pure like emotion, and Kirk was the pure kind of I just act on instinct, and I do what I want based on feelings and immediate. Where Spock is pure logic, and that was kind of a big um, theme for the entire original series, and kind of watching Kirk come back and dive into it again for a number of episodes. When Kirk was first introduced in Strange New Worlds, I'm like, this guy does not remind me of Kirk in any way. And more recently, there's like, oh, now I see it. Very much resembling the Kirk that we would come to know in the original series, and so that was fun to watch, and also a little bit of the kind of early banter and the growing connection between him and Scott for later on.
Yeah, I don't think we saw Kirk and Spock interact in this episode, but he did get a lot of quality time with Scotty, which was nice to see. And
Right.
I mean, I think Scotty is just a little bit younger than Kirk, but he clearly admires him because he is a superior officer. And, when the cool kid comes over to you at school and says, "Hey, want to hang out?" You're like, you look over your shoulder like, "Who? I'm sorry, are you talking to me? You want to hang out
Yeah.
with me?"
Right.
And it was nice to see Scotty start to realize that, oh, like sometimes he has good ideas that are even better than his superiors. Like he didn't rush La'an head on and make her angry. He just set up a booby trap for her, which was the smart thing to do. Brains always win over brawn.
Exactly.
Hmm.
I enjoyed watching Pike, the interaction with him and Batel, where he was like double cleaning and basically just being completely insulting to her. Um, and the kind of almost say OCD because that's not what this was, but there's like an obsessive
Yeah.
thing about the way he went about doing everything, and that's how the Vulcan part of him expressed itself in this episode, much in the same way that La'an's. Well, we find out she's not actually Vulcan. Um, she's Romulan, and kind of watching her dive into um, the stereotypes that we tend to understand about Romulans from previous shows and movies about them being sneaky and warlike. And her whole thing was like, we're going to go start a war with the Klingons. Um, and I, and with Chapel, you kind of had her like dive into the science of how efficient and multitasking she could be as a Vulcan, just completely cutting friends out of her life. And I really enjoyed watching, I guess, various aspects of like a Vulcan personality being split between the four of them and explored in that manner.
Oh, you're right. I hadn't thought of it that way. What I was thinking of was there was a issue of the Superman comic book where he went around and he asked his friends, "If you had my superpowers, what would you do?" And
Okay.
he asked Perry White, he asked Jimmy Olsen, he asked Dr. Emil Hamilton, and they all had different things that they would do. Like Perry White said, "Oh, I'd be a great journalist and I would eavesdrop on gangsters and write stories about revealing all these crimes." And Emil Hamilton would be like, "I'd fly out into outer space and do all this great science." And none of them said, "I would be a superhero."
Yeah.
So with this episode of Star Trek, it was kind of like if you had Superman's powers, no, I'm sorry, if you had Spock's Vulcanness, if you were a Vulcan, what would you do with being a Vulcan? And every one of them had a different answer. Like they were all rude and condescending, but especially Pike to his own girlfriend, saying like, "Oh, you smell like a human. You're lucky you can't smell how bad you smell."
Mm.
And Chapel saying, "I loved this line. I'm breaking up with you." And Spock's like, "You've already done that." She says, "Yes, I'm doing it again."
Ending your
Uh,
friendships.
and I had
Yeah.
totally not understood or didn't understand or missed the fact that she was a Romulan, that La'an was Romulan. Not until you told me just now, and now it all makes sense. I was trying to figure out at the end, like I thought there was this beautiful dream slash dance sequence that she had with Spock, where he said, you're resisting me because you're afraid. What are you afraid of? And I don't really feel like we got the answer to that. Do you?
No, I don't think we got an answer. There was a scene um, between Pike and I'm drawing a blank on who he was talking to, where they both come to the same conclusion at the same time. Where they talk about this ship that I can't talk about and this mission that I can't talk about, and we'll both say it at the same time, and they both say Romulan.
That was La'an.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she was very much a Romulan.
Huh. Yeah, that does make sense because they're genetically the
Scheming
same.
and yeah, well, yeah, they're related. And there's the scheming and whereas everybody else was very kind of tamping down their emotion, very logical, no emotions. She was very much about like the emotion, the emotional diving into like I figured out what the problem with the ship is, and that's that we don't have enough weapons. I'm going to start a war. And I thought she was my favorite. I think of all of the expressions of various parts of the Vulcan personalities that came out in these four. She definitely was my favorite to watch.
Interesting. I think Pike was mine, and I think the one moment that made him my favorite was when Battelle just went off on him and the Admiral. I love that she did that. I love that she stood up for herself. And finally, she said to both of them, "Get out," which was hilarious because they were in Pike's quarters. But they did
Yeah.
both leave. But before Pike left, he took the extra serving of leek pudding.
Oh, did he? I
He's
didn't
like
see
it.
that.
He's like, if you're not going to eat it, and if you don't like it, I will eat it because I think it's delicious.
I There was kind of the other side of that coin too, where at the end, where Chapel is apologizing to her boyfriend and to Spock, and she makes this soup, and apparently the soup is awful. I was just saying, but I definitely agree with you about uh, that scene between the Admiral and Battelle and Pike, where uh, Pike was just undermining Battelle, and um, just making things worse and worse. And finally, she snapped and yelled. And later on, we learned that that was kind of not that he was looking for that necessarily, but that her ability to stand up for herself and express what she wanted, even in the face of someone who ranked her and who was her boss, that she would eventually make a good replacement for him when he retired. I thought that little callback was nice. And then, of course, I think I need to go apologize to Battelle before she changes the locks on my quarters or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was a fitting end for her arc because, I mean, she was rescued from the Gorn like 6 months ago in Star
Yeah.
Trek time. And she's been waiting for an assignment. She said that she was probably going to be a Starfleet captain, and she had these two choices, and neither of them would bring her in close proximity to Pike anytime soon. And it turns out she's not going to be a starship captain. She's going to be the head of the JAG, which is awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was really great. And yeah, you're right. We've had a couple of episodes where she's showed up and hasn't really had anything to do, other than like, Mbenga says that I'm stable. Yay. And, great. So seeing her actually get some forward motion again with her character, and I hope, and as the show progresses, we'll eventually get to see her move into that role and see the effects that it might have on her relationship with Pike and the people around her.
I will say in the previous episode, the documentary, What is Starfleet? She showed up for the potluck dinner at the end. She didn't
Oh, that's
she
right. Yeah.
she didn't have any lines, and that was the only scene she was in. But if I was an actor and I found out that there was an episode shooting that had a potluck, I would ask to be in that scene.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes her arc feels like, and you brought this up before, such a smart idea that like sometimes there are just too many storylines trying to be pushed into um, a single episode, and you end up either short shrifting someone or people being left out entirely.
Hmm. Yeah, and in this episode, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't see Spock bring back Pike and Nurse Chapel and Uhura. He didn't go into their Katras. I'm glad we got to see it with one of the characters at least, Laan, so we know what it looks like. And when that sequence started, she was meditating in Cetaceous Ops. I don't know if you recognize the room she was in, but we've never, as
Yeah,
far as I know, we've never seen Cetaceous Ops in a live action Star Trek show, only in Prodigy and Lower Decks.
right. Yeah, that was a new and interesting setting, and I really enjoyed that. And yeah, I was disappointed that it was kind of obviously this is streaming, so there's no commercials there, but like after a commercial break, they came back and they had already switched back to being human, three of them. I was like, well, that's kind of disappointing, but at least they, made room for Laan's transformation. And I
Yeah,
did really finally I like that they finally got to admit that, like, okay, Laan and Spock are dating. Come on, you are, you know. And how, what'd you say? I can't believe I just made that so awkward or something like that, where they Spock tries to join them at the table, and she's like, "Go away," and
well, I thought she had a valid excuse to send him away. I thought she just wanted to talk to number one about
she
because
did.
because I've been in those situations where I'm at a work conference and I
Yeah,
see two of my coworkers sitting together and I go over and I say, "May I join you?" And the answer is no, we're having a private conversation. I was like,
yeah,
"Oh,
and that makes sense. And I didn't have a problem. I didn't have a problem with any of it, but like it was the way that she kind of snapped at him and how uncomfortable that whole thing felt. That was sort of funny. And then they wrap it up, and he's just sitting at the table eating a sandwich, not even looking.
that
I
was
thought that was
hilarious."
I thought that was really well done. Oh, and that brings me to Una's storyline.
Yes, please.
Patton Oswalt, love that guy as Doug the Vulcan. I enjoyed that and they did definitely the Patton and what's her name, the actress. Um,
Rebecca Romaine.
yeah, how there was a very palpable chemistry there. They didn't have to. I mean, obviously that she sold it well. Like, oh, there's this thing that happens between us, but there is actually like on-screen chemistry between the two, and that was so that made that fun to watch. Where like they're so attracted to each other that they can't get anything else done, and there was also a nice sort of juxtaposition there of you have Spock who wants nothing more than to like, yes, he's exploring his human side, but he wants to be Vulcan. Then you have a Vulcan that just wants to be, is fascinated with the human experience, and led to what I felt was kind of a very funny post credits moment there as well.
Yeah, the post credit was amazing, and I have to wonder how much of that was ad-libbed.
Yeah, I don't know about the actor that plays Spock. I don't know what his background is around sort of comedy and improv, but certainly Patton is very good at that kind of thing and is a great stand-up and
Hmm.
has that comic timing, and really it seemed to play well into that moment. It was sort of odd that like the it is slash it's thing came up, because you say it's when you're saying the possessive it's. Why is it? Why would you have a problem with it when it's just the you know?
Yeah. And also the
But
idea that he didn't know how long humans sleep for when he dated. Oh, I guess Una's not a human. But yeah, just the like basic physiology and biology that he could learn from a book that humans sleep 8 out of every 24 hours.
right, yeah. I thought that whole little sequence was very well done.
And it tied back into the beginning where Pelia was giving Pike a high five, which I thought that was a whole very awkward sequence. But
Yeah,
then Spock is teaching
mhm.
Ugh how to do a high five.
That I thought was yeah, I thought that was funny. Again, another like what is Pelia doing here thing. But then watching the you are too slow, I thought was and then when Doug does it back, you are too slow. Victory.
Yes.
I thought that was really, really cute and a lot of fun. And I'm glad that they did that. There was a reminder as well. I'd forgotten, Lon is an augment. I'd forgotten about that. And that was brought up.
Or
And
descended from an augment. Yeah.
right, yeah. And that is part of her heritage, because that hasn't, since um, that the early episode where they kind of explore a little bit of that with Kelly in the past and time travel and stuff. They haven't really revisited that too much, so it's a nice reminder. And you do wonder, like, okay, how much of that played into sort of her being a Romulan as opposed to a Vulcan, and why that was brought up.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was
Um,
interesting that Beto was back because he had left the ship and then came back just to see Uhura. You know, his documentary is done, so I thought we wouldn't see him again.
yeah, well, they had established kind of a playful, flirty, possible romance there in previous episodes, and it was fun to see that. It was a little unnerving about like, but he consented to be brainwashed. You know? um, that was a little odd, but it was fun. Yeah, to see him back, and maybe he'll continue um, to show up in further episodes because if he does, then in addition to having the Uhura romance thing, you also have a great sort of family interplay between him and his sister as a way to further explore her personality.
This scene did solidify something for me that I think I've raised in previous podcast episodes with you, which was in TNG, Riker, I think, came right out and said that they don't enslave or exploit animals, including as a food source. And yet in this episode, Beto said, oh, Uhura, the Vulcan, has taught me that I do not require animal protein.
Mm,
And then Erica is like, yeah, but what about bacon?
right.
And so even in the previous episode with the potluck, we saw Pike carving up a ham or something, and I could lie to myself and say, okay, that is replicated meat. That's not real. We saw similar banquets on the Enterprise D with TNG, and I could tell myself that was replicated. But now they're coming right out and saying, like, he's eaten 4 cheeseburgers in 2 minutes. He loves bacon. Animal protein is the way to go. And I was like, so did something change between TOS and TNG, or is this just one of those early lines that Roddenberry made up without thinking about the implications that they're choosing to now ignore?
Yeah, it seems more like just not poor planning, but just kind of a lack of planning around like every single line of dialogue or whatever. Um, I well, you and I are both vegetarians, and so things like that tend to stand out, at least for me, when I watch a show. And the bacon thing, I thought it was humorous the way Ortega's laid it out, but it also seemed kind of unnecessary. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't. This felt like new information for me about the state of humanity in that point in our future. So, oh
True,
well.
true.
That's all I got about this episode. Anything else before I ask if you liked it?
Uh, no, you should ask me if I liked it.
M, did you like 4.5 Vulcans?
I liked it. I even
Yeah,
thought I even thought it was very funny the insult, the like backhanded, I guess, insult where 4.5 Vulcans to beam down and watching Spock's reaction to hearing that from Pike on the transporter pad.
that's true. Yeah, like he was the least Vulcan among them, and
Uh,
that was a that was a great place for him to be in, for him to realize that his humanity was in a way a strength. And even Pike at the end said, "Are all Vulcans monsters?" No
yeah,
offense. And I think it's the humanity that keeps Spock from being a monster.
agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, so two
Yeah,
great episodes.
I agree. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
I feel like this season in general got off to a slow start, and the more I watch it, the more I like it. Like these are 2 episodes right here where I could see myself doing something I don't do very often, which is go back and rewatch them.
I would agree with that. Um, I don't know that I will necessarily revisit the first one. I thought it was a great episode, and I really kind of enjoyed sort of feeling the self analysis happening as I'm watching what was going on the screen and what do I feel about military interactions and the parallels to America and things like that. But I don't know that that's what I'm going to sit down and watch again. I won't turn it off, if it's on or something. But
Sure. If you're doing a complete season rewatch, you wouldn't skip it.
right, exactly. I'm not going to skip that one, but I'm not going to seek that one out. This one, I might like if I'm looking for something fun to watch. this might pop up into my head as like find that episode and just put that on because that's funny and light, and yeah, I really enjoyed it.
This seems like something I could show to somebody who thinks Star Trek is all serious and talk and stuff like that. And I'd be like, no, like this is also Star Trek.
Yes, yeah, they've definitely done a great job of kind of providing a lot more texture to the Star Trek universe, I would say, than some of these other series have done. Yeah.
It's often frustrated me that sci-fi is perceived to be a genre when it's actually a setting. Like you could have seven friends who live on the Enterprise and hang out in 10 Forward. You can call it Star Trek Friends, and it's like a sitcom. It's
Yeah,
sci-fi, but sci-fi is not the genre, it's just the setting. You could have murder mysteries, you could have musicals, you could have comedies, and Strange New Worlds has done all of that.
yeah. Well, I would argue that speculative fiction is it's only like legitimately a thing when the story cannot be told without the science fiction part of it, and that's not what Star Trek is, at least not so far, as we've seen.
Right.
Um, these could be, yeah, take the Trek out of it, take the sci-fi future out of it, and these are still good stories. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we got two good stories this week, and we have two more to go this season.
agreed. I'm looking forward to it.
As am I. Until next time.
You are too slow. Victory.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.
That was your best yet.
Thank you. Well, the first two were like, I have nothing to say. So, the bar is pretty low.